The family featured in this first report say that they had grown quite attached to the ghost in their historic Illinois house. They called her Harriet, and they believed she was a protective force operating from the other side. They grew so attached, in fact, they asked a paranormal investigator to perform a cleansing to help Harriet move on. Well, now Kathy and Gus Johnson say that that may have been a big mistake. The house was a wreck when they bought it, but Kathy and Gus Johnson loved this Civil War-era mansion in rural Illinois and set about restoring the historic home to its original Georgian splendor. In June of 1990, work began, and as the Johnsons painstakingly peeled back the layers of paint and time, something strange emerged, the feeling that the family was not alone.
We would be scraping wallpaper or whatever we were doing, and we would set our tool down, and then we'd come back and we wouldn't be able to find it. And it was a joke at first because we never even imagined about ghosts. But then a lot more started happening. The spirit started walking the hallways, making noises, slamming doors.
The Johnsons gradually began to believe that something or someone was trying to make contact.
I was laying on the couch, I was ill, and I was asleep with my dog laying with me. And I immediately wakened, and the bright light came through the room and into the kitchen, and my dog jumped up, and he chased, and then I chased after him. It was a bright white light, and very warm and good feeling.
Kathy's daughter, Jody, was the first to see the presence in human form.
I would be coming downstairs in the middle of the night, and I saw a silhouette sitting in the den, and I'd see the long, straggly hair. I could tell she was an old woman. I couldn't tell any distinct features. It was just shock to see someone sitting in your den in the middle of the night.
Gus Johnson was the last family member to accept the paranormal forces at work in his home. Although he was reluctant to appear on sightings, Gus did agree to let us show you home video taken shortly after his first ghostly encounter.
Then there was the night that I woke up, sat up, and she had already entered the room. I was facing toward her. She was walking across the end of the bed at a diagonal, heading to the master bathroom. She walked to the bathroom and was gone. I immediately woke my wife up and told her, I said, this is the strangest thing I've ever seen. Immediately I thought, this is a real ghost, this is no dream.
Gus's sighting was enough to turn him from skeptic to believer. It was also enough to encourage Kathy to research the rich history of the house and interview former residents who still lived in the area.
There was a family that lived in the house. They had 4 boys, and the youngest boy had to sleep with a pup tent over his bed because he said that the old lady kept bothering him at night.
Kathy dug even deeper into the home's history and learned that it was originally built in 1862 by Robert and Harriet Dickerson. Kathy intuitively felt that Harriet, who was born in 1828 and died in 1913 at age 85, was still haunting the house she had helped build nearly a century and a half before. The Johnsons began calling the ghost Harriet and found her antics non-threatening, even endearing, although at times Harriet could be a little annoying.
She liked to bother me at night. She would walk up and down the hall, which there was a squeaky board in front of my room. So you'd hear her walk up and down, up and down.
And Kathy says Harriet was also in the habit of putting her 2 cents in when it came to family business.
My husband, Gus, has a developmentally disabled son, and he lives with us, and his name is Mark. And Mark is 13, and he's 6 foot tall. And Mark got into trouble on the school bus, and so he had to be punished. So we punished him and then sent him to bed. That night, Harriet just drove us insane. She was very upset that we punished Mark. The rest of that night, after we went to bed, she bumped the bed, she walked the halls, she did everything she could do to let us know that she was very upset that we had punished Mark.
She is standing, looking at me, arms down. I would say screaming, but there was no noise at me. She just kept mouthing, and finally she stopped, and like that was gone.
We came to find out through investigating that Harriet had 11 children. And we believe that Harriet was a motherly type person and that she was always watching out for the children.
The ghostly activity became so omnipresent that the Johnsons contacted Rob Conover, a paranormal investigator who has documented numerous local haunting cases. In addition to his research work, Conover also claims to be able to communicate with ghosts.
The reason we called Rob was because Harriet had been here quite a while, and we all loved Harriet. And I loved her enough that I felt like Harriet deserved to go to the light.
What people have to understand about spirits is just a person without a body. And that's the way I speak to them as a person. And I explain to them what's on the other side of the light and why they should go through the light and why they'll be happier there. And that's when they go through the light.
But before communication could begin, Rob and his partner had to assess the level of haunting activity in the house. The pair canvassed each room, noting a variety of environmental factors. Electromagnetic field readings were particularly high in the master bedroom, and Conover felt that this was a prime location to set up a surveillance camera in case Harriet decided to make her presence known. The camera was backed into a far corner and left on to run by itself. Later, when the video was played back, the team found strange noises and movement on the tape.
Probably the best thing that happened was on the one tape, you hear 3 breaths. Sounds like an exhale of air into the camera microphone. Then a little while later, the camera zooms in onto a bedpost and then zooms back 3 times by itself.
In order to zoom the camera, you have to push the buttons. You can't do it otherwise.
I had set the camera up in a corner of the room. You would have either heard someone come in the room, because when you walked into the room, the dresser drawers, the latches would rattle. 2, when I did set it up, there was no possible way to get to the camera without being seen or heard.
I believe it was a paranormal experience with the camera, and I believe that it was Harriet's ghost that did it.
Convinced that there was a ghost, Conover proceeded to the next step, an attempt to communicate with Harriet and lead her to the light.
We were in the living room of the residence.
Harriet?
Kathy had come downstairs to join us. I called Harriet to see if she would come into the room, and she did come into the room and manifested herself. And that's when I began talking to her about the light, which was behind her. And Kathy began talking to her also and explaining why she should go through the light, her children waiting for her family.
I just felt so strongly about Harriet being able to be with her 11 children. And so I told her, I said, Harriet, go to the light and be with your children. And she did.
When Harriet went through the light, it's like an immediate change in atmosphere from cold to warm and peaceful.
After that incident happened and Harriet went to the light, we've never seen or heard from her since.
We're happy for her, but we do miss her.
That wistfulness soon turned to terror because, the Johnsons tell Sightings, as soon as Harriet went to heaven, all hell broke loose inside their house. When Sightings continues, more of our investigation and the psychic impressions of investigator Jorianne Defray. After a cleansing ritual designed to rid their house of a ghost, the Johnson family of Leroy, Illinois, had a problem. While the ghost, known as Harriet, a sweet and well-meaning spirit by all accounts, did seem to have moved on, she forgot to close the paranormal door behind her. And as soon as Harriet was gone, a new spirit began to make its presence known, and it was anything but sweet.
I was talking to a friend on the phone, and all of a sudden, the dryer started agitating really bad. I unplugged the dryer, and it wasn't on. I opened the door, and the drum was not rotating. I mean, it was agitating like a washing machine would, but this was the dryer. I was getting frightened. I felt like there was another spirit in the house, and it was not Harriet. There was an evilness to it.
It was the first sign that something was wrong. Kathy called Rob Conover, the paranormal investigator who claimed to have helped the benevolent ghost, known as Harriet, move into the light. As soon as Conover arrived this time, he sensed an evil presence.
I knew instantly that Harriet had been here to protect this house from another spirit, which was not a good spirit.
Everyone in the family is being affected. The Johnsons' 13-year-old son, Mark, has been particularly traumatized by the new entity.
Mark's not sleeping well. He will not sleep in that room. He is scared. Every night he asks to sleep with my father, which makes me mad that he's bothering my brother.
I was sound asleep, and I awakened to someone saying right in my ear, "Die, die, die, you bitch." I believe that it was the same entity that moved the dryer, and he was trying to frighten me. That was about the point that we started figuring out that it was a male, because I heard the male's voice. He was frightening me, and I'd never been frightened before.
Again, Conover surveyed the home, documenting environmental factors. But this time, he also enlisted the help of 2 local psychics who, independently, determined the identity of the evil spirit.
They came up with the name John Grady. And through the psychics, they learned that he had been a boarder in the house, and that Harriet had, and through the research found out Harriet did have boarders in the house, and that he was an alcoholic, a woman beater, and had been killed while trying to strangle a woman.
And this time, the family permitted sightings to document Conover's unique form of exorcism.
And you're going to leave this house before I do.
I went down into the basement where John seemed to be emanating from, and I challenged him to scare me or to show me something, and I called him a coward and told him the only people he could scare were women and children. But when we came back upstairs, my assistant proceeded to make a derogatory statement about John Grady.
There was a loud bang on the floor underneath my feet, and we all heard it, and I felt it. And it was in a part of the house where there was no basement, just crawl space. So it wasn't, you know, somebody down in the basement trying to play a trick.
The spirit of the man that we grew to know as John Grady was always in the house, but Harriet had control and kept him in place. And once Harriet was gone, then he came out and took control.
Conover could not dispel the evil force known as John Grady. Word of the haunting spread throughout the Johnsons' small town, and newspaper reporter Jeanette Kendall was asked to investigate.
I had heard a lot about the house before I arrived there, so I was kind of a little tense and nervous and not knowing what to expect.
As soon as Jeanette began her interview with Kathy, the bizarre activity started up.
All the electricity went off in the kitchen, and she had to go down in the basement to change the fuse, and left me sitting alone in the dark in the kitchen. So that was a little eerie for me. She came back up after changing the fuse, and everything was fine.
Okay, where were we?
About 5 minutes later, everything went off again.
While Kathy, her daughter, and Jeanette Kendall waited in the darkness, Rob Conover arrived and immediately went upstairs, prepared to do battle with John Grady once again.
He said that the spirit was trying to get away from him, running from room to room, and he had us feel the wall that the spirit was going through, and it felt cold to the touch, colder, than normal. And then we all went downstairs, and that's when we heard a loud thumping noise upstairs.
Jody, put your hand on the rail and block the staircase.
John Grady went down the stairs in front of me.
I felt Jonathan coming down the stairs, and I said, "Kathy, watch me," because I was starting to feel sick.
And all of a sudden, Jody starts turning beet red. Tears are coming out of her eyes, and she grabs her chest like this, and she can't breathe.
I was bending over, having chest pains, and it really hurt. I felt him just run right into me, and I could just feel the electricity running through my body.
Her reaction was so bizarre compared to anything that we've seen that she felt like, and we all felt like, that Jonathan went right through her.
The family is terrified and adamant that another cleansing must be done. They want Conover to force the evil entity from the house, but there are fears that John Grady will not go without a fight.
John Grady is kind of a thorn in a paranormal investigator's side because he doesn't respond to the normal things that we do.
Clearly, paranormal reinforcements are needed. Sightings has asked that psychic investigator Jorianne DeFrey come to the house and attempt to communicate with the spirit, and then assist Conover in what he hopes will be the final cleansing.
It's very special to me to put an end to this.
Conover and DeFrey's assault on the spirit presence of John Grady will continue on the next edition of Sightings. A lot of paranormal investigators believe that there are invisible doors between this world and the next, and that these cosmic portals allow spirits from the past to visit the present. On recent editions of Sightings, we brought you the haunting story of the Johnson family, who are finding out that a ghost door can open anywhere. And you never know who is going to show up. The first spirit to haunt Kathy and Gus Johnson's home was a kind, protective spirit the family called Harriet. But when Kathy helped Harriet move into the light, the door was left open and a new, malevolent ghost moved in. Paranormal investigator Rob Conover, along with psychic investigator Jorianne DeFrey, are now faced with a dangerous mission. They've been asked to contact and then eliminate the evil entity.
When I walked into this house, I had the sense that this house was haunted. You could tell that there was energy here, but it wasn't clear at that time what kind of energy. I want to walk around and just get a sense of what's going on, what I'm picking up. I might be hearing information, so I'm just going to kind of talk to myself and see what I pick up and feel. When I started going down the hallway and I started feeling the heaviness, the sick to my stomach, that's when I could tell that something very, very negative was here.
Conover had been the original investigator, but Jorianne DeFrey had never been in the house before and knew nothing about previous investigations, and yet her psychic impressions were dead on.
I'm feeling a heaviness. It's heavier, it's denser, it's thicker. The air. Really bad. It's really bad. People were getting beaten. There was a lot of little, I could see some little girls going back and forth, but somebody was beating somebody up badly. I mean, this should have been laden with blood right here.
The psychic visions Jorianne recorded on audio tape also validated the findings of two other psychics who had surveyed the house. They all evoked the spirit of a brutal man named Jonathan Grady.
Really good. I think you've got a lot of activity here.
A lot of activity.
A lot of strange things going on.
I definitely think Jorianne sensed Jonathan and got the same feeling that we all had had and that other psychics had told us, and that he was an evil person.
All right, so we'll take a walk through here.
Now, DeFrey and Conover join forces to search out the portal that will lead to Jonathan Grady. And immediately, Jorianne is drawn to the stairway, where a thermal camera had earlier picked up an anomaly. She then went into the bedroom, where Rob had detected extremely high levels of electromagnetism.
This was the area of my first confrontation.
Oh, is it really?
With the bad spirit.
Okay.
Here. And I drove
See,
him
I've got
through.
goosebumps all over the place.
We could walk over and we could feel about this far out of the wall, all the way to this part.
The coldness.
The coldness.
I was able to visualize the presence. I was able to see the entity. And it was a very, very, very ugly being. Right here.
But it was in Kathy's daughter's room that Jorianne felt she could almost reach through to the other side.
When that moves.
It's moving.
Yeah.
It's moving this way.
Got it over there?
We chased him.
Yes. Come here, Kathy.
All right.
Can you feel that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. When we first walked into the bigger room, it was very, very cold, much colder than the hallway, and there was no reason for that because the temperature's all the same upstairs. But there was definitely coldness.
The electromagnetic reader on a couple of occasions did register in spots where it shouldn't have. And there were a couple of spots and a couple of times when it did move a great deal when I felt and sensed the entity was around.
Both investigators felt the presence of John Grady was now with the group, and they laid out a strategy.
I would like to actually start cleansing each of the rooms. And as we're doing that, call in the white light to cleanse each and every room as we're going along.
Jorianne began the cleansing process in the basement, where Rob Conover had first claimed to encounter the violent entity.
I want you to visualize this beautiful bolt of light, like a white tornado, just going around this whole room.
I'm getting a feeling in here. Also getting a good reading in here.
Coming back here, okay.
If this is the entity that's in the house, I challenge you at this point to show yourself to me.
There is energy here.
I feel like he's moving now. And he, according to this, he is too.
Room by room, the cleansing continued until they came to the bedroom and the door that Jorianne sensed there.
We found a vortex in that same room, and we worked at closing down the vortex. All right, so my sense is here. If you can visualize this, this opening that's about in this room, and that's going through this, permeating this wall to the other room, just start visualizing this thing getting smaller and smaller and smaller. As a last resort, when we were trying to close the vortex, we realized that the spirit was still very, very present, and he wasn't going to go anywhere.
I'm calling you forward now to my presence.
During a ritual that resembled a seance, Rob, Jorianne, and Kathy all felt that an evil spirit was moving among them, challenging them to fight.
In that process, I was then, and I'm very grateful because I could see this entity, very, very ugly. When I sensed him, the same animosity was there, the same negativity, the same challenge. Come on, you guys think you're so smart. You know, try to get me.
What was going through my mind was I was determined to do exactly what she said to help rid the family of this entity. When she began telling me what I was going to see, of course, I began seeing that.
You know, as soon as my head dropped, I just kind of knew that I was going to be kind of used so Rob could hear this entity speak and what the entity was saying.
There was a physical confrontation in my mind between me and an entity. It's time for you to go. You're not wanted here anymore. I saw myself just physically fighting with this thing, and to the point where I did subdue him and get him into this box and push him into this abyss that I was seeing in my mind.
Emotionally, I could feel it. My jaws were tight. They felt tired afterwards. My body felt tired. I felt like we had done it physically.
This is a hole that has to be like that which goes on forever. Going down, 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 down. Sometimes the spirits can come back, and you'll have to keep redoing the process. But it looked like, as of today, while we were doing this process, that it was a successful process.
All we can do is wait and see. We'll just keep our ears open and our eyes and see if he's gone.
I believe at this point, yes, Kathy and her son, her family should have a lot more peace in this house.
My conclusion is that I hope it is concluded. But if it's not, I'll be back.
The best hopes of Jorianne Dufresne and Rob Conover seem to be coming true. Kathy Johnson reports to Sightings that so far, the spirit of John Grady has not come back. And Kathy says her whole family is relieved to think that he has, probably, closed the door behind him.